Hi, I'm Jen from Build Basic, and today I'm showing how I built a rustic A-frame style bed for my son. I'm pregnant with our second little boy, and once again, I have totally caught the nesting bug. So this time I want to build a kid's bed for our older son. He's going to be transitioning to a big boy room so that we can use the nursery for the new baby. And so as I was looking for inspiration, I came across a photo of a camp in Wisconsin called Camp Watawanga. And they have an A-frame style loft there that totally inspired me to create a new design for a kid's bed. I went through a ton of variations on this bed, trying to get the design just right and also make the bed really easy to assemble and disassemble should we have to move. So the completed bed consists of 7 sections: the top bed, the optional trundle bed, the 2 side walls, 2 roof pieces, and a back wall. There are also optional add-ons like the trusses, the railing, and the ladder. The first part I built was the tray for the top bed. The tray of the bed is a solid sheet of 3/4 inch plywood with a front and a back wall that's set between the 2 side walls. The easiest way for me to assemble these pieces was to flip the base upside down on the table and secure the sides around it with glue and pocket hole screws. While the side walls set flush with the bottom edge of the base, the front and back hang down to hide the thickness of the additional 2x4 supports, which I also secured with glue and pocket hole screws. Next, I built the 2 side walls from 2x4 framing. I started with a basic frame assembled with glue and wood screws. I could now attach the bed to the side walls. I first clamped the walls to the ends of the bed, 1.5 inches below the top edge. This is where I'll connect the roof later. I drilled 2 pilot holes through the bed at each end and inserted a washer and a hex head bolt. On the opposite side of the hole, I tapped a T-nut into place. Now, as I tighten the bolt, the T-nut will dig into the wood and hold the connection tight, but allow for me to remove and reinstall the bolt in the future. I should note for this step that I also did try using carriage bolts with a regular nut, as that would have been a little bit cheaper. And I just found that once I put those side plywood panels on, it was going to be way too hard to get your hand up and behind the panel to loosen the nut, and it really make the bed difficult to disassemble. So that's why I went with the hex head bolt with the washer and the T-nut. Once I installed all 4 bolts, I rocked the bed onto the legs, but immediately noticed a little bit of a wobble. I opted to add another crosspiece to each side wall to create a connection point for a lower bolt. And with that, the wobble turned into a very solid connection. I could now turn my attention to assembling the trundle bed and adding the wheels. Once complete, I pushed the trundle bed into place to check the fit, and then took it back out and rolled it to the side while I completed the rest of the bed. It was now time to work on the roof of the bed. Now I wanted the peak to be as tall as possible to create that A-frame look, but I also knew that I had 8-foot ceilings in the room where this bed would be placed. So I needed to work within the constraints of how wide the bed was depending on the mattress. I was using a twin XL, and the height of the ceiling, which was 8 feet. I first cut the 2x4s and 1x2s to create the side windows. I dry fit the pieces and then assembled them with wood glue, pocket hole screws, and finish nails. Next, it was time to cut the framing for the roof line of the bed. Now I wanted to start with a sharper angle at the peak of the bed because I knew that this angle was 53 degrees, which is slightly sharper than what my miter saw can handle. My miter saw really can only handle up to 50 degrees. So I needed to create a quick jig in order to make that cut. To make the jig, I cut a scrap piece of 2x4 to 45 degrees. If you can clamp the board in place on your saw, then go ahead. But my saw didn't allow for this, so I had to screw it to a second block and clamp it more securely to the back fence. Since this angle gave me 45 degrees, I only needed to set the saw to cut the next 8 degrees to make up the additional part of the angle. I slid my board into place and supported the opposite end with a sawhorse and cut the final angle at 53 degrees. Now I could cut the length of the board at the opposing end at 37 degrees. With the boards cut, I marked the location of the window and then spaced the vertical boards equal distance apart to frame the roof. I finished up assembling the roof parts by connecting the base plate that connects to the bed and the top plate that will join the 2 roof pieces together. With a little help, I could now raise the two sides of the roof and clamp everything in place. Next, I drilled a hole through the base plate of the roof line and into the sidewalls. I'm using the same combination of a hex bolt, washer, and T-nut to make this connection strong but easy to disassemble. At the peak, I used a carriage bolt and a nut since the connection will be easier to access from both sides. Now that the main parts of the bed were assembled, I could turn my attention to the add-ons, like the railing and the stairs. For the railing, I used 1x2 boards and pocket hole joinery to assemble the parts, making sure that one end of the railing was angled to follow the roof line. I then used metal mending plates to mount the railing to the inside wall of the bed. Next up was the steps, which consisted of two 1x6 boards mitered at the ends at 45 degrees, and 3 steps connected between the sides using glue and pocket hole screws. I attached ladder hooks to the steps so that they could hook onto the bed, but be easily moved out of the way to pull out the trundle bed. To attach the trusses, I cut 4 2x4 pieces that would overlap the roof framing, and then doubled the front and back trusses with 2 smaller pieces that fit between the framing. I clamped the pieces in place and then drilled through the truss and into the framing with a piece of tape on my drill bit to ensure that I didn't drive completely through the framing. I then removed the truss and widened the hole to accept an insert nut. I could now tighten a connection bolt through the truss and into the insert nut in the framing for a strong yet removable connection. Once the trusses were in place, I glued and screwed the doubled up pieces to the front and back trusses to finish the face of the frame and to act as a support for the back wall. For the purposes of this video and being able to show you guys how I sized the back panel, I went ahead and removed all of the forward trusses, leaving only the back truss in place. To size the back wall, I first cut the side notches so it could rest on the bed while I marked the angle of the roof line. I then marked the piece for the peak and cut the parts to size with a circular saw. I then assembled the 1x2 back window with pocket hole screws and traced its location on the back wall. I used a circular saw to cut the opening and then finished the corners of the cutout with a handsaw. To install the back wall, I used the same connection method as the trusses, first drilling a hole through the back panel and into the framing, and then removing the back to open the holes in the framing for insert nuts. I then positioned the back panel in place and tightened short screws through the panel and into the insert nuts. Next, I used the jig to cut the 1x6 trim and attach it to the face of the roof line to finish the edge. At this point, I removed the back panels and primed and painted all of the pieces. For me, it was just easier to paint the framing while it was open and before I secured the panels. And it was easier to paint the panels while they were flat in my shop, especially because I wanted to paint the inside of the roof panels white, and that would have been pretty difficult once they were secured to the framing. Once everything was dry, I glued and nailed the panels onto the sidewalls. At this point, I was still thinking I might paint the roof black, so that's why you'll see some black panels in this video. I then clamped the roof panels in place and marked their bottom edge. I set my circular saw to the deepest bevel, cut the bottom edge of each roof panel, and set them aside. To give this bed a little something extra, I wanted to install some rustic barn boards on the back wall and the front wall of the beds. But I didn't want anything that was rough next to bedding, and I wanted something that was really easy to clean. And also something that wouldn't add any weight to this bed, as it's already pretty heavy. So I decided to use a thin sheet of vinyl that I could really just cut and glue into place, and it would give me the perfect look that I was after. To do this, I sized the pieces of vinyl with a utility knife, applied panel adhesive to the face of the beds, and then smoothed and clamped the vinyl in place. I repeated this process on the back wall using the wall as an outline for my cuts. With the vinyl in place, I could now apply glue to the back window, place the back wall onto the window, and then layer on the window molding. I could then secure all 3 layers by nailing through the molding and the wall and into the edge of the window. Seeing that back wall installed with the vinyl and the window for the first time was probably my favorite part of this whole project. It just finally felt like everything was coming together. Next, I glued and nailed the roof panels in place and added PVC lattice strips of trim to make the roof look like metal. Now that I could see the black roof in place, I was worried it might look too dark in my son's room, so I finished with a few coats of white paint before taking the pieces apart to carry into the house. Once in his room, we laid the top bed on its side, attached the side walls, and then flipped it upright. Next, we raised the 2 roof panels and connected them to the bed and to each other at the peak. I could then mount the trusses, add the railing, and set the ladder in place. I also decided to screw a piece of plexiglass to the back side of the back window so that I could add a fun forest print. And I opted to add some fairy lights to the inside of the peak for soft storytime lighting. Our son absolutely loves this new bed, and I was thrilled that we could get it done before the new baby arrived. If you're looking for a step-by-step tutorial for this project, or if you want to download the building plans, visit build-basic.com. I'm Jen Largis. Thank you so much for watching this video and for supporting Build Basic, and I'll see you next time.